What happened in the 48 hours between April 20th and April 22nd will be studied as a masterclass in diplomatic theater that reveals everything about the terminal decay of American leverage in the Middle East and why the tools Washington continues deploying to shape adversary behavior have become counterproductive to the point of strategic absurdity. On April 20th, the Biden administration announced what officials described as a comprehensive peace framework for the Middle East involving security guarantees for Israel, normalization pathways with Saudi Arabia, and conditional sanctions relief for Iran in exchange for verified nuclear program constraints. Within 6 hours, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian held a press conference in Tehran where he described the proposal as performance art designed for American domestic consumption and suggested that Iran would consider the offer seriously when America demonstrates capacity to enforce agreements it has already signed. 18 hours later, the Treasury Department announced new sanctions targeting 12 Iranian entities involved in drone production, effectively contradicting the peace proposal before Iran had even formally responded. I am going to take you inside every dimension of this sequence. Why would the Biden administration announce a peace initiative and then immediately undermine it with new sanctions? What does Iran's public mockery reveal about their assessment of American credibility and strategic coherence? And what does a Middle East look like when the former hegemonic power can no longer distinguish between diplomatic engagement and performative gestures that satisfy domestic political requirements while achieving no foreign policy objectives? There are no diplomatic answers tonight. 3 questions will structure everything that follows. By the end of this analysis, you will understand why this episode represents not a failed negotiation, but rather a demonstration that American Middle East policy has become entirely decoupled from strategic reality, and why countries throughout the region are constructing security architectures that assume American irrelevance rather than American leadership. Let me start with the technical components of what was actually proposed, because the gap between the proposal's stated objectives and its structural impossibility reveals everything about why Iran responded with mockery rather than engagement. The peace framework announced on April 20th contains 7 major provisions, but 3 constitute the core structure. First, Iran accepts enhanced International Atomic Energy Agency monitoring, including daily inspector access to declared facilities and monthly access to suspected undeclared sites, in exchange for phased sanctions relief totaling approximately $90 billion in unfrozen assets over 36 months. Second, Iran commits to limiting uranium enrichment to 20% purity and maintaining stockpiles below 300 kilograms, with automatic sanctions snapback if thresholds are exceeded. Third, America provides security guarantees to Israel, including commitment to defend against Iranian attack and enhanced military aid package worth $22 billion over 5 years. These provisions are structurally contradictory in ways that make the entire framework unworkable before negotiations even begin. Let me explain why. The sanctions relief is phased over 36 months with multiple verification milestones that must be achieved before each tranche is released. But the snapback mechanism allows America to reimpose all sanctions immediately if Iran is determined to have violated any provision. This creates a structure where Iran must maintain perfect compliance for 3 years to receive full sanctions relief, but America can revoke that relief instantly based on unilateral determination of violation. Think about what that means from Iran's perspective. They have watched America unilaterally withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2018, despite International Atomic Energy Agency certification that Iran was in full compliance. They have watched America maintain sanctions even after change of administration, despite campaign promises to rejoin the agreement. They have watched European signatories prove unable or unwilling to provide sanctions relief independent of American permission. Given that history, why would Iran accept a framework that requires them to dismantle capabilities, accept intrusive monitoring, and maintain perfect compliance for 3 years in exchange for sanctions relief that America can revoke instantly without cause? The proposal asks Iran to trust American commitment after America has demonstrated repeatedly that its commitments are worthless the moment domestic political calculations change. The security guarantee to Israel compounds the structural absurdity. America commits to defend Israel against Iranian attack, while simultaneously asking Iran to accept a framework that constrains Iranian capabilities. From Iran's perspective, this is asking them to unilaterally disarm while America promises to help their primary adversary. The logic is precisely backwards if the goal is persuading Iran to accept constraints. The enrichment limits reveal similar structural problems. 20% enrichment is sufficient for medical isotopes and research reactors, but insufficient for weapons production, which requires 90% enrichment. Iran has already achieved enrichment above 60% at pilot scale. The proposal asks Iran to verifiably abandon capability they have already demonstrated in exchange for sanctions relief that might be revoked before they receive it. The numbers tell you this was never a serious proposal. $90 billion in phased sanctions relief over 3 years represents approximately $30 billion annually. Iran's economy is approximately $600 billion. The sanctions relief represents 5% of GDP spread over 3 years. For that amount, America is asking Iran to abandon nuclear program advancement, accept permanent monitoring that other nuclear threshold states have never accepted, and trust that America will not revoke relief based on future political calculations. No rational actor accepts that trade. The cost-benefit analysis is overwhelmingly negative from Iran's perspective, which means this proposal was not designed to be accepted. It was designed to create domestic political cover in America by demonstrating that the administration attempted diplomacy before resorting to other options. This brings me to the central question. If the proposal was not designed to achieve diplomatic breakthrough, why announce it at all? And why did Iran choose public mockery as their response strategy? Here is what you need to understand. American Middle East policy has become almost entirely performative, designed to satisfy domestic constituencies rather than achieve foreign policy objectives. The Democratic base demands diplomatic engagement rather than military confrontation. The pro-Israel lobby demands unwavering support for Israeli security. The national security establishment demands maintaining the appearance of American relevance in regional affairs. These domestic demands are mutually contradictory when applied to Iran policy. You cannot simultaneously engage diplomatically with Iran, provide unconditional support to Israel, and maintain economic warfare against Iran through comprehensive sanctions. But American domestic politics requires the appearance of doing all three simultaneously. The peace proposal satisfies the domestic requirement for diplomatic engagement. It allows the administration to claim they pursued every diplomatic avenue before considering alternatives. It provides talking points for officials defending the approach in congressional testimony and media appearances. But it was constructed with provisions that Iran could never accept, which means its failure was predetermined. The sanctions announcement 18 hours after the peace proposal reveals the performative nature. If the administration actually believed the peace framework might succeed, they would not immediately undermine it by announcing new sanctions. The fact that they did announce new sanctions demonstrates that they never expected the proposal to succeed and were already proceeding to the next phase of the domestic political script. From Iran's perspective, this created an opportunity for strategic communication that mockery exploits more effectively than formal diplomatic rejection. A formal rejection allows America to claim that Iran is unwilling to engage diplomatically. Public mockery communicates that Iran understands the proposal was never serious and will not dignify performance art with diplomatic process. Foreign Minister Emir Abdullahian's press conference deployed mockery with surgical precision. He thanked the Biden administration for the creative writing exercise and suggested that the proposal should be submitted to publishers of fiction rather than foreign ministries. He noted that announcing sanctions while proposing sanctions relief demonstrates either profound confusion or profound cynicism, and we are uncertain which is worse. He concluded by stating that Iran would consider American proposals seriously when America demonstrates capacity to maintain agreements longer than a single presidential administration. This mockery serves multiple strategic functions. It denies America the diplomatic narrative they sought to construct. It signals to regional audiences that Iran is not intimidated by American diplomatic pressure. It communicates to domestic Iranian audiences that the leadership understands American tactics and will not be manipulated. And it establishes a public record that when this diplomatic episode fails, the failure resulted from American lack of seriousness rather than Iranian intransigence. The sanctions announced on April 21st targeting drone production entities compound the messaging disaster. These sanctions have no practical impact because the entities targeted have no American assets to freeze and conduct no business requiring access to American financial systems. The sanctions are purely symbolic, designed to show congressional hawks that the administration is maintaining pressure on Iran. But symbolic sanctions announced immediately after a peace proposal communicate that America is more interested in satisfying domestic political constituencies than in achieving diplomatic outcomes. Every regional actor observing this sequence draws the same conclusion. American proposals are not serious diplomatic initiatives. They are domestic political theater that can be safely ignored. The mathematical reality reinforces Iran's position. Iran has been under comprehensive sanctions for over 4 decades. During that period, they have developed nuclear capability, ballistic missile technology, drone production capacity, and regional proxy networks that give them more influence in Middle Eastern affairs than at any point since the Shah's fall. The sanctions have not prevented capability development. They have not collapsed the regime. They have not forced capitulation. If 40 years of sanctions failed to achieve American objectives, why would Iran believe that additional sanctions on 12 entities will alter their strategic calculus? The answer is they do not believe it, which is why they responded with mockery rather than concern. Let me take you through the historical pattern because this is not the first time that a declining hegemonic power has attempted to maintain influence through diplomatic gestures unsupported by credible inducements or threats, and understanding the pattern illuminates what comes next. The Soviet Union in the late 1980s provides instructive parallel. Soviet leadership recognized that their economic model was failing and their military overextension was unsustainable. But they attempted to maintain the appearance of superpower status through diplomatic initiatives that promised more than Soviet power could deliver. The result was progressive erosion of Soviet credibility, as regional actors recognized that Soviet commitments were worthless. Poland provides the specific example. The Soviet Union attempted to maintain control through a combination of diplomatic engagement with solidarity and threats of military intervention if reforms went too far. But the threats were not credible because Soviet capacity for intervention had eroded, and the diplomatic engagement was not serious because the Soviet leadership could not actually accept independent Polish democracy. The result was that neither the engagement nor the threats achieved their objectives, and Soviet control collapsed not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. America in the Middle East in 2025 is following the same pattern. American military capacity for large-scale intervention has eroded after Afghanistan and Iraq. American economic inducements are less attractive when sanctions have pushed adversaries toward alternative economic relationships with China and Russia. But American policy continues attempting to maintain the appearance of hegemonic control through diplomatic initiatives that promise more than American power can deliver and threats that are no longer credible. The Iran nuclear negotiations from 2013 to 2015 represented the last moment when American diplomatic engagement was taken seriously by regional actors. At that time, America could credibly offer sanctions relief because European allies would cooperate in providing it, and America could credibly threaten military action because the Iraq war fatigue had not yet fully set in. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action succeeded because both inducements and threats were credible. The unilateral American withdrawal from that agreement in 2018 destroyed the credibility of both inducements and threats. The inducements are not credible because America has demonstrated it will revoke them based on domestic political calculations. The threats are not credible because America has demonstrated it lacks political will for military intervention. What remains is diplomatic theater that fools no one except possibly the domestic American audience it is designed to satisfy. Iran has adapted to this reality by constructing a regional strategy that assumes American irrelevance. The proxy networks in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen do not require American permission or cooperation. The economic relationships with China and Russia are not denominated in dollars and not dependent on Western financial systems. The military capabilities are developed domestically or acquired from sources that do not defer to American pressure. This creates a situation where American diplomatic initiatives and sanctions announcements have approximately the same impact as similar announcements from any mid-tier power without significant regional military presence or economic leverage. Countries go through the motions of responding because diplomatic protocol requires it, but no one adjusts their strategy based on what America announces. The broader historical pattern is that hegemonic powers maintain control through a combination of credible inducements and credible threats. When both erode, Ibokaro are interlek urborem, the power can maintain the appearance of control for a period through diplomatic activity and symbolic gestures. But eventually, regional actors recognize that the diplomatic activity achieves nothing and the symbolic gestures are meaningless, at which point the hegemonic power becomes irrelevant to regional security calculations. We are watching that transition occur in real time in the Middle East. The peace proposal and sanctions announcement are not diplomatic strategy. They are the dying echoes of a hegemonic power that is not yet recognized that it no longer sets the terms of regional order. Now, let me walk through the scenario pathways for how this situation develops over the next 12 to 24 months, because there are multiple trajectories and understanding each helps prepare for what follows. Scenario 1, escalation through proxies and limited strikes. America cannot force Iranian compliance through diplomacy or sanctions, so pressure increases through covert action against nuclear facilities, enhanced support for anti-government elements, and coordination with Israel on limited military strikes. This scenario creates ongoing low-intensity conflict without resolving the fundamental issue of Iranian nuclear advancement. Probability 40%. Scenario 2, acceptance and containment. America implicitly accepts that Iran will achieve nuclear threshold status and shifts strategy to containment through regional alliances and extended deterrence guarantees to allies. This is strategically rational, but politically difficult because it requires acknowledging that 4 decades of Iran policy failed to prevent the outcome it was designed to prevent. Probability 35%. Scenario 3, grand bargain through multilateral framework. America works with European allies, Russia, and China to construct a new diplomatic framework that provides Iran with genuine security guarantees and economic integration in exchange for verified nuclear constraints. This requires America to accept that it cannot dictate terms unilaterally and must compromise on issues including regional Iranian influence and Israel policy. Probability 15%. Scenario 4, crisis-driven confrontation. Events overtake deliberate policy, creating a crisis scenario where limited military action escalates beyond what any party intended, potentially including Israeli strikes on nuclear facilities, Iranian retaliation against American regional assets, and broader regional conflict. Probability 10%. I assess scenario 1 as most likely over the next 18 months. America will continue the current approach of diplomatic gestures paired with covert pressure because it satisfies domestic political requirements while avoiding the difficult decisions that scenarios 2 and 3 would require. Scenario 4 remains the most dangerous despite lower probability because crisis scenarios by definition involve factors beyond deliberate control. The critical variable is Israeli decision-making. If Israeli leadership concludes that American diplomacy will fail to prevent Iranian nuclear capability and that American security guarantees are insufficiently credible, Israel might proceed with unilateral military action regardless of American preferences. That action would force American response, potentially creating the crisis scenario despite neither American nor Iranian intention. American strategic planners understand this risk, which is why the security guarantee to Israel was included in the peace proposal, despite making the proposal less acceptable to Iran. The guarantee was designed to reassure Israel sufficiently to prevent unilateral action during the diplomatic process. But if Israel assesses that the diplomatic process is theater rather than serious negotiation, the guarantee becomes insufficient restraint. Here is what this means going forward. American Middle East policy has entered a terminal phase where diplomatic initiatives are designed for domestic consumption rather than foreign policy achievement. And regional actors understand this distinction clearly, even if American domestic audiences do not. Iran will continue developing nuclear capability regardless of American diplomatic initiatives or sanctions announcements. They have concluded that American commitments are unreliable and that their security requires indigenous capability that cannot be revoked by American political calculations. This conclusion is based on observable American behavior and is rational given that evidence. Regional actors will continue constructing security architectures that do not depend on American participation or approval. The Saudi-Iran accommodation, the Turkey-Egypt normalization, and the Gulf Cooperation Council independent security initiatives all reflect the same assessment. American security guarantees are not reliable, and American diplomatic engagement is not serious. American influence in Middle Eastern affairs will continue declining not through dramatic confrontations, but through progressive irrelevance. Countries will maintain diplomatic relations with America and welcome American economic engagement where it serves their interests, but they will not adjust their core security strategies based on American preferences. The domestic American political system will continue producing Middle East policy that satisfies internal constituencies while achieving no foreign policy objectives. The gap between announced policy and strategic reality will widen until a crisis forces recognition of the gap, at which point the adjustment will be traumatic rather than managed. This is not the outcome that American policy has worked toward for 7 decades, but it is the outcome that American strategic choices have produced. When you withdraw from agreements while demanding others maintain compliance, you destroy your credibility as negotiating partner. When you maintain sanctions that do not achieve stated objectives for 4 decades, you demonstrate that the sanctions are symbolic rather than strategic. When you announce peace proposals and new sanctions within 18 hours, you reveal that your diplomacy is performance art. I might be wrong about specific timelines. The transition might be faster or slower than I project, but the structural analysis is sound. American Middle East policy has become decoupled from strategic reality. Regional actors recognize this and are adapting accordingly. The adaptation is producing a Middle East where American preferences are increasingly irrelevant to regional security calculations. This is not prophecy. This is observation of demonstrated patterns and projection of their logical continuation. Iran's mockery of the peace proposal is not diplomatic discourtesy. It is accurate assessment of American credibility. The sanctions announced 18 hours later are not strategic pressure. They are domestic political theater. The gap between what America claims to offer and what America can actually deliver has become too wide to sustain diplomatic engagement. What you do with this analysis is your choice. Question it. Test it against evidence. Watch what happens over the next 6 months as this diplomatic initiative either produces results or confirms that it was always performance art. The truth reveals itself through events, and we will analyze those events together as they unfold. We are watching the final act of American hegemony in the Middle East, where the former dominant power continues going through the motions of leadership while regional actors construct the order that will replace American dominance. The peace proposal that Iran mocked and the sanctions announced to satisfy domestic hawks are both symptoms of the same terminal condition, a power that can no longer distinguish between strategic action and performative gesture. So, the question is not whether American Middle East influence continues declining. The question is whether American leadership recognizes the decline in time to manage it strategically, or whether crisis forces recognition in circumstances that maximize harm to American interests. That is the analysis we will continue to develop together as this historic transition unfolds.